Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're looking at something that touches all of us pretty deeply. How our earliest emotional experiences can shape the way we connect and form relationships as adults.
hmm
We're going to explore what are often called abandonment wounds, those unseen scars from childhood experiences where maybe we felt emotionally unseen, unheard, or unheld.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it, how these early relational experiences, even ones we might not consciously remember, can just keep influencing our adult lives,
Right.
especially in our closest connections. It really makes you think about, well, the very foundation of how we see ourselves and what we expect from others.
Yeah, absolutely. Think for a moment, everyone listening, about the patterns maybe you've noticed in your own close relationships.
hmm
Have you ever wondered why certain dynamics seem to repeat? Or why some connections feel, I don't know, secure, while others just trigger anxieties or that urge to pull away? This deep dive is really about trying to untangle some of those threads. So if you find yourself thinking about these questions, about your own relationships, or maybe you just want to understand the deeper currents of human connection, well, you're in the right place.
Definitely. And if this exploration resonates with you, if you're keen to dig deeper into understanding, the intricacies of human psychology and relationships,
Yeah.
we really encourage you to subscribe and maybe hit that bell icon so you won't miss our future discussions.
Good point. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly are these abandonment wounds? Because it's not always about a parent physically leaving, is it?
No, that's a really crucial distinction to make. I mean, while physical absence obviously has a huge impact,
Sure.
the kind of abandonment wounds we're focusing on today are often rooted more in that feeling of being emotionally invisible.
Invisible? How so?
Like your inner world just doesn't seem to matter, or your emotional needs aren't really being seen or met. And this can be particularly tricky because, outwardly, a child's physical needs might be perfectly well taken care of.
Right. Food, shelter.
Exactly. But their emotional landscape is consistently ignored, maybe dismissed.
So it's almost like the unspoken message becomes your feelings not important here. You're kind of on your own with this. And maybe even there's something fundamentally unlovable about you. That sounds incredibly impactful on a developing kid.
It really is. And these repeated early experiences, they can leave such a lasting mark on a child's developing sense of self-worth and also on their expectations for future relationships. So usually not just one single event either.
Right.
More often it's a pattern of interactions or maybe even just a lack of responsive interactions that conveys these really powerful and unfortunately damaging messages over time.
Okay. The source material we looked at mentions these early experiences leaving an invisible imprint on the developing brain. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that mean in more sort of concrete terms?
Certainly. So when a child experiences a scarcity or maybe inconsistency in that vital emotional connection, their nervous system basically adapts. It has to for emotional survival.
Okay.
And one way this happens is through what we call hyperactivation.
Hyperactivation.
Yeah, imagine like a smoke detector that's set way too sensitively.
Uh-huh.
Even a tiny bit of steam can set it off. That's kind of what happens with the threat response. The child becomes constantly vigilant, almost scanning their environment for any subtle cues.
Looking for signs.
Exactly. Signs that might indicate love, attention, or, on the flip side, rejection. They might become incredibly attuned to tiny shifts in tone of voice or minor changes in behavior, always watching.
Wow, that sounds like living in a state of constant high alert. Really exhausting.
It absolutely can be.
What's the other way the nervous system might adapt then?
Well, the other main adaptive strategy is deactivation.
Deactivation.
Yeah. So here, the child learns to sort of dampen down their emotional responses, to essentially numb their feelings as a way to protect themselves from the recurring pain of, unmet needs or maybe unpredictable care.
So they just shut down?
In a way, yes. They might learn not to express their needs, withdraw emotionally, and basically build these internal walls as a form of self-protection. And these early adaptations, whether hyperactivation or deactivation, become these deeply ingrained patterns.
Which we then see later.
Exactly. They often show up as what we recognize as different attachment styles in adulthood.
Okay, and this naturally brings us to attachment theory. You mentioned John Bowlby earlier, and Mary Ainsworth expanded on his work. How did their, groundbreaking work help us understand this fundamental link, between early caregiving and our adult relationship patterns?
Bowlby's initial work was truly foundational. He really highlighted that fundamental human need for a secure attachment bond with a primary caregiver, like it's biologically wired.
Right.
He proposed that this early bond serves as a kind of internal template, or maybe a blueprint, that shapes our expectations and behaviors in all our later relationships.
A blueprint for connection.
Pretty much. Then Mary Ainsworth's strange situation research came along and provided actual empirical evidence for these different patterns. She did this by observing how young children reacted to brief separations from and then reunions with their caregivers in a controlled lab setting.
Right. I remember learning about that study. It was fascinating watching the different ways kids responded. Some got upset when the caregiver left, but were, easily soothed when they came back,
The secure one?
while others seemed almost indifferent or even actively avoided the caregiver on their return.
Exactly right. And these distinct patterns of behavior that Ainsworth observed, they offer these critical insights into the very foundations of our connection styles. Her work helped categorize these patterns into what we now generally understand as anxious, avoidant, and secure attachment styles.
So it's really not just about personality differences then. These attachment styles are more like learned ways of relating, developed based on how consistent and warm or not our early caregiving was.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. They are, in large part, a reflection of the consistent responsiveness and emotional attunement, or the lack thereof, that we receive from our primary caregivers.
Okay.
So when a caregiver is generally reliable, tuned in to the child's needs, provides a sense of safety, well, the child is likely to develop a secure attachment.
Makes sense.
But experiences of inconsistent care or neglectful care, or maybe even intrusive caregiving, can lead to the development of anxious or avoidant styles.
Okay, let's dig into those a bit more. Starting with anxious attachment, what are some of the key things we might see in someone with this style?
So anxious attachment often comes from experiences of inconsistent caregiving. The caregiver might be loving and responsive sometimes, but other times they might be unavailable, unpredictable, maybe even intrusive. This inconsistency creates this fundamental sense of uncertainty for the child about whether their caregiver is reliable.
Always wondering.
Exactly. So as adults, people with an anxious attachment style tend to deeply crave closeness and intimacy. But at the same time, they harbor this significant underlying fear that the connection will be lost.
So wanting it but afraid of it.
Right. And this can show up in various ways, like maybe frequently overanalyzing texts or emails from their partner,
Okay.
a tendency towards clinginess, perhaps needing constant reassurance, especially during conflict, and having these really intense emotional reactions to what they perceive as slights or any sign of distance from their partner. It all stems from that deep-seated fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
Often with that inconsistent care, you see individuals developing this sort of hypervigilance for signs of rejection. It's not just wanting closeness. It's this deep belief that the connection is always fragile, always precarious.
Like it could disappear at any moment.
Just like their early experiences with those unpredictable caregivers, yeah.
Wow, that sounds incredibly emotionally draining. For the person experiencing it, sure, but maybe for their partner too.
Oh, it can be very taxing for both, absolutely. That constant worry and the need for validation can sometimes, unfortunately, inadvertently push the partner away, creating the very distance they fear because their behaviors might feel overwhelming or demanding.
A difficult cycle. Now, what about avoidant attachment? How does that typically develop? And what might it look like in adult relationships?
Avoidant attachment often develops in response to caregivers who are consistently emotionally distant, maybe unavailable, or even critical.
So the opposite of inconsistent, more consistently absent emotionally.
Yeah, or dismissive. The child learns pretty early on that their emotional needs probably won't be met and that showing vulnerability might actually lead to rejection or being dismissed.
Ouch.
So as adults, individuals with an avoidant attachment style tend to really prioritize their independence. They often dismiss the importance of intimacy in relationships.
Really? Dismiss it.
Yeah, or downplay it. They might actively create distance, both physically and emotionally, to avoid that vulnerability they associate with close connections. They often see emotions as something to be, managed or even suppressed, rather than as a source of connection and understanding.
So if someone with anxious attachment fears their partner leaving, someone with avoidant attachment might fear getting too close in the first place. Is that fair?
That's a very insightful way to summarize it, yes. They've learned to rely primarily on themselves, and they can feel quite uncomfortable with the interdependence that naturally comes with a close, intimate relationship. They often highly value their personal space and autonomy, sometimes to a degree that can definitely be perceived as emotional distance or unavailability by their partners.
Okay. And then we have secure attachment. This sounds like, well, the goal, maybe? The
Mhm.
most adaptive and healthy style. What are the hallmarks of someone who is securely attached?
Right. Individuals with secure attachment typically had those consistent experiences of emotional attunement and safety in their upbringing. Their caregivers were generally responsive.
There for them.
Yeah, providing comfort when they were distressed, but also supporting them as they explored their world. So as adults, they can usually balance intimacy and autonomy with relative ease.
Nice balance.
They tend to trust their partners, they're resilient when conflict arises, and they don't experience those same intense fears of abandonment or that deep discomfort with closeness that characterize the other two styles. They can generally navigate the normal ups and downs of relationships with a sense of security and trust.
That sounds like a really solid foundation for building healthy, fulfilling relationships. Now, you mentioned something earlier, and the source material highlights it too, this concept of earned secure attachment. What does that mean?
Ah, yes, earned secure attachment. This is a really important and frankly hopeful concept.
Hopeful how?
It basically acknowledges that even if someone didn't have those consistently positive early experiences, maybe they developed an insecure attachment style, anxious or avoidant.
Right.
It is absolutely possible to develop a secure attachment style later in life, in adulthood.
Really? So it's not fixed?
Not fixed at all.
Yeah.
It can happen through increased self-awareness, through conscious effort to understand and change those old relational patterns, and crucially, through the experience of being in healthy, supportive relationships over time, maybe with a partner, friends, or a therapist.
Wow.
It really highlights the brain's remarkable capacity for change, its neuroplasticity, throughout our entire lifespan.
That is incredibly encouraging to hear. So, okay, how do these early wounds and these attachment styles actually play out in our adult relationships? It's not like we're consciously thinking, oh, this reminds me of my mom when I was 5 every time our partner doesn't text back immediately, right?
No, generally not on a conscious level, you're right. But these early experiences of abandonment, they don't just vanish with childhood. They absolutely can significantly influence our adult relationship dynamics, often in subtle yet really powerful ways.
How so?
Well, they might manifest as intense jealousy, perhaps jealousy that seems out of proportion to the situation,
Mm-hmm.
or a tendency towards emotional detachment, just shutting down when things get difficult, or conversely, a persistent neediness, that constant craving for reassurance and validation we talked about with anxious attachment.
Right.
As the source material suggests, our partners can sometimes unconsciously become, well, the term used is proxies for unmet childhood needs.
Proxies, that's a really powerful image. Like our adult partners almost become stand-ins for our parents or caregivers in some unconscious way.
Exactly. That's a good way to think about it. And the real challenge arises because no adult partner, no matter how loving and supportive they are,
Right. Can fully meet those deep-seated needs that originated way back in childhood. You
Yeah.
just can't. So when those old unmet needs get triggered in our adult relationships, and inevitably our partner can't meet them in the exact way a child needs a parent to,
yeah,
it can reactivate those primal feelings of abandonment. This can lead to intense emotional reactions like panic or complete emotional shutdown, or unfortunately, even behaviors that end up sabotaging the relationship, almost like a way to preemptively avoid the hurt they anticipate is coming.
wow, this really sheds light on why certain relationship patterns can feel so deeply ingrained, so stuck, and just so difficult to break free from.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the common triggers then in adult relationships that might activate this underlying abandonment anxiety?
Yeah, there are several common ones. One really significant trigger is the fear of rejection or withdrawal.
Okay.
Like we discussed earlier, seemingly minor events, a delayed text message, a perceived coldness or brevity in their partner's tone, maybe a canceled plan. These can be interpreted through that old lens of past abandonment. Right, the old blueprint kicks in.
Exactly. Triggering intense emotional reactions that might seem completely disproportionate to the actual present situation. It's like that threat detection system is just on overdrive.
It's like the adult brain momentarily flips back to that vulnerable child state, feeling abandoned all over again.
Precisely. Another very potent trigger is emotional unavailability in a partner.
Oh.
When we unknowingly, or sometimes even consciously, choose partners who mirror the emotional unavailability we experience with our primary caregivers,
Yeah.
well, that can powerfully reactivate those old wounds.
Because it feels familiar, even if it's painful.
Often, yes. It reinforces that ingrained belief that my emotional needs won't be met, and it just perpetuates these painful relational patterns. It's that familiar ache, even if we can't consciously name its origin in the moment.
Right, that makes sense. And then what about conflict, disagreements? How do those play into triggering abandonment anxiety?
Oh, conflict and miscommunication can be major triggers, especially for individuals with those anxious or avoidant tendencies.
Why, particularly them?
Well, for them, disagreements can feel less like a normal, maybe even constructive part of navigating a relationship
Uh-huh.
and more like a fundamental threat to the very foundation of the connection itself. It can signal the potential for being emotionally or perhaps even physically left or abandoned.
So the stakes feel incredibly high in those moments.
Exactly. It's
Uh-huh.
as if the slightest bump in the road feels like the entire relationship is about to just derail.
Yeah. Now, the source material also touches on the neurological impact of early neglect. It mentioned it's not just emotional, there are actual physiological changes happening in the brain. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a critical piece of the puzzle to understand. Chronic emotional neglect during those really sensitive early developmental periods can indeed lead to an overproduction of cortisol,
Stress hormone.
the primary stress hormone, yes. And prolonged exposure to elevated cortisol levels can actually alter the developing brain's structures. It can fine-tune the stress response systems in ways that have lasting effects into adulthood.
Wow. So what kind of effects?
This can result in that heightened state of hypervigilance we talked about, constantly scanning for threats. Or, conversely, it can lead to emotional numbing, which is a protective mechanism against feelings that feel overwhelming.
So the brain itself is literally adapting to this early environment where emotional needs weren't consistently met, maybe where there was a perceived sense of threat or unpredictability.
Exactly. It's adapting to survive that environment. And neuroscience research points to some key brain regions that are particularly affected, the amygdala, for instance.
Okay, what does the amygdala do?
It acts as the brain's early warning system, basically. It processes emotions like fear and threat. In individuals who experience early neglect, the amygdala can become hypersensitive,
Hypersensitive, meaning,
meaning they might be more easily and more intensely triggered by perceived threats in the relationships, even when those threats might not seem significant or maybe even real to someone else.
like that smoke detector analogy again.
Precisely. Think of the amygdala as your brain's alarm system. In someone who experienced early neglect, this alarm can become overly sensitive, triggering that fight or flight response in relationship situations that might not objectively seem threatening.
That heightened threat response would certainly feed into the anxiety we see in anxiously attached individuals. What other brain regions are involved?
Well, the hippocampus is another key player. It's crucial for processing emotions and forming new memories, especially those autobiographical personal memories.
Uh-huh.
Chronic early stress can impact the hippocampus too. It might become smaller or its functioning might be affected, which could potentially impact the ability to regulate emotional responses effectively and maybe make it harder to integrate past relational experiences in a healthy, coherent way,
Okay. And finally, what about the prefrontal cortex? What role does that play here?
right? The prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for our higher level cognitive functions, things like emotional regulation, reasoning, planning, impulse control, basically our executive functions.
The thinking part.
Kind of, yeah, the regulator. Research suggests that in individuals who experienced early neglect, the prefrontal cortex might show altered development or functioning. It might be, let's say, underperforming in its job of managing emotional responses.
So putting it all together.
Yeah, so you have this biological interplay, potentially a hypersensitive amygdala, the alarm, maybe a compromised hippocampus, memory and emotion processing, and a less optimally functioning prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
the regulator. This combination can really contribute to those anxious spirals of worry and rumination,
Right.
as well as the avoidant behaviors aimed at just suppressing emotions. It makes the process of healing these early wounds a truly complex one, involving both emotional and neurological dimensions.
It really paints a picture of these deeply ingrained patterns, doesn't it? But as we thankfully discussed earlier, the good news is that healing is possible. The journey from wound to wholeness, as the source material puts it. Where does that journey typically begin?
Well, a fundamental first step really is cultivating mindful self-awareness.
Being aware.
Yes, and actively engaging in what's often called inner child work. This involves consciously learning to acknowledge and connect with the parts of ourselves that still hold those early experiences, the parts that felt unseen, unheard, or unheld.
Connecting with that younger self.
Exactly. Practices like journaling can be great. Somatic exercises, too, focusing on bringing awareness to bodily sensations and the emotions connected to them. And guided visualization techniques can be incredibly helpful.
How do those help?
They help create a sense of safety internally, allowing those younger, more vulnerable parts of ourselves to finally be seen, heard, and validated. It's about offering that sense of being heard and validated that might have been missing back then.
But offering it to ourselves now.
Precisely. By intentionally offering that compassion and validation to our inner child, the adult self can begin to relate differently both to themselves and, as a result, to others in healthier, more compassionate ways.
That makes a lot of sense. And there are specific therapeutic approaches that can be particularly helpful in this healing process too, right? You mentioned emotion-focused therapy and attachment-based EMDR earlier.
Yes, absolutely. Emotion-focused therapy, EFT, and attachment-based EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, are two powerful, well-researched therapeutic methods. They're specifically designed to help individuals safely explore these deep-seated attachment wounds,
Uh-huh.
and importantly, to facilitate the development of new, more secure relational patterns.
How does therapy help with that specifically?
Well, in this therapeutic process, the therapist provides a really consistent, empathetic, and attuned presence. This relationship itself can be a profoundly corrective experience.
Corrective how?
By essentially acting as a co-regulator, offering the kind of consistent emotional attunement that might have been significantly lacking in early life, the therapist can become a kind of secure base,
Ah,
offering a safe, stable relationship within which the client can explore past hurts and learn and practice new ways of relating and processing emotions.
that sounds incredibly valuable.
Mhm.
And for individuals who maybe aren't currently in formal therapy, or perhaps as something to do alongside it, what does the process of building more secure attachment in adulthood look like in our everyday lives and relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. Building more secure attachment as an adult is typically a gradual process, and often nonlinear. There can be steps forward and back.
Okay.
It fundamentally requires cultivating self-compassion, really recognizing that these early relational patterns developed as understandable survival mechanisms.
They served a purpose then.
They did. So treating ourselves with kindness and understanding as we navigate the often difficult process of change is key. It also involves developing honest and open communication skills within our current relationships.
Learning to talk about it.
Yes, learning to express our own needs and vulnerabilities in healthy, constructive ways, while also being open and responsive to the needs and vulnerabilities of our partners. It's a two-way street.
Right.
And finally, it's about consciously cultivating consistent emotional presence in our relationships, making a genuine effort to be available, attuned, and responsive to our partner's emotional experiences, showing up.
So it sounds like a very conscious, intentional effort is needed to create the kind of relational environment that fosters safety and security.
Absolutely. It takes
Mm.
intention and practice. And this brings us back to that concept of earned secure attachment, which offers such significant hope here.
Yeah, tell us more about that hope.
It powerfully underscores the fact that through this conscious effort, through dedicated self-work, maybe therapy, and through actively engaging in healthy, supportive relationships, individuals really can, over time, essentially rewire their internal world.
Rewire the brain almost.
In a sense, yes. They can learn through new, consistent, positive experiences that love doesn't have to be conditional, that emotional closeness isn't inherently dangerous, and most importantly, that they are inherently worthy of love and belonging, regardless of their early history.
That's powerful.
It's a powerful reminder that our past relational experiences, while deeply influential, do not have to rigidly dictate our future relationships. Our early attachment templates, those blueprints we talked about,
Yeah.
while they are formative, they are not set in stone. They can be revised, redrawn as we gain new insights and develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and our fundamental relational needs.
So ultimately, understanding these abandonment wounds and attachment styles, it really reveals that our earliest experiences, powerful as they were, they don't have to define our relational futures. These early blueprints can be redrawn. The journey of healing abandonment wounds sounds like it's truly a journey of reclaiming our inherent worthiness, finding our authentic voice maybe, and expanding our capacity to both give and receive love in ways that feel secure and, well, deeply fulfilling. It really encourages us to look inward with compassion, but also outward with a greater understanding of that often intricate dance of human connection.
It really is a profound journey of self-discovery and personal growth. and one that can lead to truly transformative changes in how we experience ourselves and how we experience our relationships. It highlights the inherent resilience of the human spirit, I think, and our innate capacity for healing and for meaningful connection.
Absolutely. Well said. We really encourage everyone listening to take some time, maybe reflect on what resonated with you during this deep dive today.
Yeah.
What questions or insights popped up for you? What connections did you make to your own experiences or perhaps to the experiences of people you know? This is really just the beginning of a fascinating and I think incredibly important exploration. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you found this discussion insightful, maybe valuable, please do consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the complexities of the human experience.
Thanks for listening, everyone.